you want triangles or like if you have to go bathroom?
Yeah, so just hold everything in place.
One over the side, then on the left.
Yeah, sure. I'll make sure that,
Top.
oh, okay.
Okay, because otherwise you're going to go over 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over 2. Okay.
That's that thing when they started talking about old fashioned way making the which I remember when we did that one summer and the Kalani smooth as a baby book.
Oh, it's lit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's similar, but yeah. After doing this one, I see what you're doing there.
Had
A little
to.
bit of his there.
So in the beginning, it doesn't look like much of anything,
It was like a,
but start to
it was like this. They were making words out of that, like nothing. I mean, like quick.
Flax.
Reed?
Yeah, flax.
Yeah, over 2.
Yeah, it took some seeds. Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, now it's starting to take
Oh,
shape.
did you try grow?
Oh, no.
I haven't planted it.
Oh,
I got it though.
oh, me.
No, the plant. Does it look like flax?
over 2.
It looks like a,
Like a water lily?
like
I think almost like a flower.
Five.
Goes up, pretty good.
2.
it kind of looks like,
5.
yeah. It kind of, what's the word? It's like, in a weird way, there's like, shoot, some
Oh, okay. So that's more of a round.
But it's a.
It'll come out. It'll come out square.
It'll come out. Oh, that's it right there.
Yeah, so it's
Like larger,
And then this is
no,
the.
it's super, it's
So
super.
now you know what my terminology is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's got a straight, it's got a straight like
3 ply. So this one we did is.
it's about this wide.
4 square. 4 plus square.
It's tall because it comes out like this.
Is that this one right here? This or right this one right? 4 ply flat braid.
Yeah, so they were keeping that.
Oh, 4 ply square braid. Okay. Under 2 over 1. Okay.
Under 2 over 1.
Now, so sometimes you go, oh, wait, no. Did I do the right side or the left side last time? So look at your strings. One string will always be higher than the other. That's the next one. Under 2 over 1. Okay, you see one higher? Here, go try. It's like, what do you think these are? One is higher. Under 2.
And I still couldn't get you a canvas because it's so close.
Under 2.
I'm like the lowest photo pole.
So now you know my terminology.
Okay, one step
8.
above the lowest.
8 go under 5 over 2. Under 5 over 2. Left under 5 over 2. So you want to do 6 ply square, you go under 4 over 2. So it's just a matter of how many. So you can try. I've already cut them. And basically you need something to hold you. When you left. So terminology, under 2 over 1. I taught this to a bunch of Japanese hula dancers. And I can hear them going, under 2 over 1. Under 2 over 1.
Thanks, Corey. Sorry.
Under 2 over 1. You see here. Under 2 over 1.
Under 2 over 1.
For 4 ply flat. I mean 4 ply square.
God, I have a friend who does this like in his sleep.
And once you know, this is basic for square braid. Once you know that, you can do any. So
he
take
does a lot of this kind of stuff, the round.
Yeah, square.
Cordage, but
And the
with fine
flat, the
stuff.
3 ply flat is what we do with my hair
This
every
one's
morning.
pretty.
So that's a cord, you just twist and turn, just like a TV blade.
Mm.
So there's flat braids and there's square braids.
Oh, I can't stand it.
That's right. That's right.
I had a friend who could
For
just.
some reason, anytime I do things like this,
You ever seen? You ever read
I
the
can
monkey
see
did?
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody really knows. I've seen this used in hula dancing. I've seen Kaylee Rochelle's allow use this in hula dancing, but nobody really knows what it was for. We do know they had this. There was one or two at least in collections. So it was used, it would have been probably an equal, small equal here, small equal here, and possibly a coconut or a smaller equal here. So this one is free on the shaft, right? This string is attached inside to the shaft. So you have to start with this, slide this out of the way, put the string through, tie it onto the shaft, and somehow get this back in place so that when you wind this up, this winds up on the shaft. When you pull it, makes the shaft spin. This is fixed, and this is fixed. So what have we got? It's a machine with two flywheels, right? It is physics stuff, inertia, and so that's what happened. I pulled this, and this keeps spinning just like with the Nauwili, and it turns it goes it back. And if I put some little pebbles inside here, it's the whirring stuff. We don't really know what it was for. So what if you put a tip right on there? And a drill, and if you made this round enough, this flew true enough, you could drill with this thing. And it's a real action. One of the fundamental inventions in the history of mankind. But one didn't have any beast of burden. But somebody would have figured out very well, if they had some little dog that would pull, they'd probably figured out some kind of cart they would have to do with an axle. So we really don't know. I've looked through all kinds of cultural things and different cultures that might have drifted or come to Hawaii long ago that would have brought this, what we think of as a toy, which is in fact a complex machine with several possible usages. And we just don't know. I've never found it from any other culture. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if the Hawaiians invented it, but it's one of the many unique things in Hawaiian culture. So we're going to talk about fish hooks and luhe, the squid lures, a little bit. So I couldn't bring a whole bunch of fish hooks and things. You can easily look up that man I talked about, Kenneth Emery, wrote a whole book about Hawaiian fish hooks with lots and lots of pictures. So when we get to the lunch break, maybe you guys can get your food or just stop up here for a minute before you go to get your food. This I made a long time ago with bone to show how you would use the Nauwili, which I promise you was heavily used in making fish hooks. What's this that many of you saw yesterday? The Nauwili, and there's instructions up here how to make one. But then again, it's something that involves the flywheel here, some kind of pointed tip. You have to wind it up, and then when you push on it, the flywheel makes this come back up. All I gotta do is push, 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 push. So I let the inertia bring my fingers back up. I won't try to lift up my fingers. I let the spinning bring my fingers back up. But you can drill this way, sideways, upside down, like you saw yesterday. And the different kinds of tips could drill through different things, like dog's teeth. Or, if you're making a fish hook, then you start out with a piece of bone like this, and you cracked up the bone, and you shaped it, maybe with a coral file, and then you drill a hole on both sides with the pumpkin, and then you make the pattern a little better, and you drill through all the way from both sides, and then you make that hole bigger and bigger. There's some kinds of little thin cone shells that are rough and mask-like that you can get in there and work on that. And then you begin to get a little more, and the little snood begins to be formed, and then this gets taken way down. It's got a small little snood attachment here. So this would be a delicate kind of hook for a smaller fish. And it's not really barbed. And then this one, 3 holes. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then deepen the holes, bring them all the way through the upper hole. Then you start cutting in here with the coral file. And you're, now these 2 holes, you're enlarging them. And again with a small little cone-shaped file type shell. And coral files and things, you begin to carry it on further and further to this, and then all the way to this. And this kind of a hook here obviously it doesn't have a very good barb. It's not the kind of thing that you hook the fish like we think of with a sharp hook, sharp point and a barb. This is a jaw hook. So the Hawaiians had all kinds of hooks that were made to fit the jaw of a certain fish. So the fish bit it and that thing popped over their jaw like this, they were caught. They didn't have to have a point or a barb to hold the fish. Their jaw of the fish because of the shape of the hook. So the old-time Hawaiians, when the first foreigners got here, they had lots and lots of fishing. I mean, those sailors had been fishing at every port and along the way with their iron hooks. And so they get back on the back of the ship, like at Cook's time or later, and they're fishing side by side with Hawaiians using their boat hooks, and them with their steel hooks with a real sharp point and barb. Hawaiians caught the fish right and left, and the Hawaiians didn't catch hardly anything because they were so experienced with fishing. And there's another reason I think is that sharp hooks and the other fish hooks made of bone, the shark can't feel that. They can't sense that electromagnetic thing that would happen with metal in salt water. It's going to create some kind of current. Sensitive as the shark is, and many other fish, they'll feel that tiny little current, but they don't want to take that hook. They sense something is wrong. But with a wooden hook, wood or bone like a shark hook, or these bone hooks, or a wood and bone hook, the fish doesn't sense any of that. They just take the hook and move down. So this one shows making a two-piece. I just made these and labeled them, to teach at different cultural events and things. I could leave these things out with somebody that's interested. I could talk about it. So this is how you take like a big piece of bone and then cut it. So you'd use something like a broken piece of basalt. So when you saw back and forth and get this to the point where you could break it, make it work it, but you could make two pieces out of one good big piece of bone. Like so. And so then you had to put these two pieces together, and what that solved is the problem of having a piece of bone with a curve and you're trying to catch a bigger fish and you pull on the pointed part, it's going to snap the hook at the weak point right there. So the two-piece hook was a huge technological advancement. And I said yesterday they found them in Hawaii. I used to think that was another thing unique to Hawaii, but they found them on the Channel Islands off the coast of California, and there's some in Rapa Nui, and I believe there's some on the coast of Chile. But somebody went back and forth between Chile and Rapa Nui, and somebody went back and forth between Hawaii and the coastal islands of California to carry an incredible technology. And then there'd usually be a little sliver of bone right here that reinforced this joint, and then it's wrapped at the bottom real tight. This one, Willie Gray, a friend of mine, made that one, and that's just wood. He used Milo, I think, and bone to make a two-piece of wood and bone. But that would also be pretty strong because you've solved the problem of a piece of wood that has grain, and so it wants to break right at the curve all over the place, unless you train the wood, like we talked about yesterday with the shark hooks, or you had naturally growing wood like Kauai, where the branches just grow every which way, and every now and then you can find one that has the perfect curve where the grain goes all around. That solves the problem of breakage. So how did you catch a huge grouper or a shark in the old times? Because you had those very, very superb shark hooks, and they even had a few shark hooks made out of whalebone. I have one at home that I made out of whalebone. It took me an awful long time with modern tools. But imagine, there's one in Bishop Museum. It's whalebone, about this big. And they just worked it all the way down, so they've got a great big hook. Look, it just looks like a great big hook with the barb and everything made in whalebone. So they had some mean stuff to catch big fish, and they had bolana, which we're going to talk about after lunch, as the incredible cordage, which they would use for tying those bone pieces together. And then I have another plaque that shows the different material for the hooks. And you have bone, and then you have turtle shell, and you have pearl shell. And so what was the hook? There's also a dog's tooth. There's you can take a dog's molar or even the smaller tooth of the dog and cut it in such a way that you could actually get a small hook. I've done that to make a smaller hook with a dog's tooth. So fragments of that, or even the canine, if you take the canine tooth and keep rubbing it way down, you can make a little bitty hook out of even the canine of a dog. So a turtle shell hook, if it was big, it was big was a mission. It was a great big thick, I mean some of them are quarter-inch thick, great big heavy turtle shell hooks. They would have been from huge turtles, and they also would have been real strong, I do believe. And of course they have the bone hooks, so they maybe had pigs. They really didn't make much out of pig bones that I know of. I've heard of making hooks out of pig bone, but surely somebody was making hooks out of pig bone. And so what else bone do you have in Hawaii? So we all know that too. So human bone was heavily sought after because that was the biggest mammal in Hawaii. So from previous generations or a battlefield, I mean, who cares about those? Maybe they were left just out, exposed to the sun. There's idioms about that, about baking in the sun. That's an idiom about exposing all your family history. Or dig them up. And what was it? Where was the place? It's right over at Kaʻimiloa Naval Station. Wakapu. But Wakapu, a long time ago, they were going to build something there, and they did a big archaeological dig. They found a whole lot of Hawaiian graves, and guess what was there? They were old style graves, where the bodies had been bound up and buried in a hole. And a lot of them had been dug up, and the long bones had been smashed to get pieces of bone, and threw the ewe back in the hole and threw the dirt back on. So old times, people wanted those bones really bad, fishermen and things. Whether anybody was just doing that in the night or if that was just an accepted practice, we have no idea. And it may be that this was thought to be older people from another time and from a different group. And so what? I don't know. But this bone right here on the tibia, and then somebody was a big, strong man, or especially a really successful fisherman, or especially a chief, wanted those bones. They wanted the fisherman for his mana, and they wanted the chief for his mana to make that fish look more effective. So that's, remember we talked about the Kaʻimiloa ceremony to get the long bones of the chief and make them in a small, easily concealed bundle. You could put under your kihei and slip away from the village and hide away the chief's bones. That's why you hide away the chief's bones. You want to preserve the bones forever. Those bones are the life of the land. That's the mana of the land. So you want to preserve those iwi forever. And you don't want somebody to use them for a fishing. That would be really, really unbeknown. And so that was where I'm sure the burial practice of wrapping up the bones in a bundle of topo that was easily carried and easily concealed. And the long bones were thought to carry the money. The hair and the long bones and sometimes the skull. They lasted long. So they preserved those. And the flesh and the smaller bones, as we talked about, were taken carefully away and buried or at sea. Away at sea. Nobody could get a hold of them, can't use it for sorcery or defile them anyway. The iwi, then they were very carefully preserved. So people today go, oh, no, human bones, are you kidding? This is a terrible thought to most people today, but not in the old times because you didn't have any other big bones. You want to make a big, thick hook like this, you had no choice. There was nothing else in Hawaii that you could make that with except human bones. There just wasn't any bigger bone that you could work with. So lots and lots of the bones were made of human bone, especially bigger ones. And then pearl shell and the turtle shell. So thinner turtle shell for small little fish, or you could use it. And the pearl shell was real hard to get in Hawaii because the waters here are not quite warm enough. We're a little too far away from the equator to really have pearl shell readily growing here. So we didn't have as much pearl shell. So here's a really, really interesting tidbit that I got. You heard me say, by teaching, I learn. Because I come here and I'm teaching things that I know, and then I hear something you know, and something you know, and something you know, and something you know, and I learn. I'm getting at the same time. And we're at some big cultural event at home out now, and some woman comes by and says, oh, I remember my grandfather doing that when I was 6 years old. Oh, never thought of it before. And now I hear this incredible story about something, cat catching aku. And the girl and her brother with the canoe, how my grandfather catch the aku. That's another story that remind me. But anyway, she said, and we were always taught, now this is a Chronicles, we were always taught that we were out diving and we saw a pearl shell going down under the water, and it had stones around it. That's somebody's pot. I cannot take that. That's somebody's pot. They're letting it get bigger and bigger and thicker so they can use it to make something, because it's hard to get that thing. It's very hard to get that. So what we were supposed to do was to break off the edges of a shell. Now, is that deep history? Is that cool? Break off the edges of the shell, because in Hawaii, the shells have a hard time growing anyway. And by breaking off the edges of the shell, it made it put more of its energy and its laying down of layers into the main part of the shell, so they get a thicker shell and could make fish hooks. That was very recent times history. You know, it had to be early 1900s. That was really, really some cool history. So the pearl shells are fragile, but they make really neat hooks, and just by themselves, because they glitter, you could just jig with a pearl shell hook and catch things. You didn't have to really bait it. They had some kinds of hooks that were made to hold bait better, so the barber's really not there to catch the fish's lip. It's there to hold the bait onto the hook, or if the barber's further down at the end of the hook, it's meant to help hold the bait on there. So that's kind of basics on fish hooks. They had special snoods that where the line was attached on the top of the Hawaiian hooks was a refined thing that was more unique to Hawaii too. A refined way to hold the hook, just like the top of a shark hook, being a refined way unique to Hawaii. And so the fishermen then, when they had these really, really fine hooks, they wouldn't unfix the fancy wrapping on the snood every time. I'm quite sure they had, just like on a shark hook, they had the snood wrapping and they had the little knot coming up to a certain point, probably with a little knot or a loop there, and then they could tie the line onto that particular hook, because at a certain time of day, a certain depth, a certain time of fish that they wanted to catch, they could do whatever they wanted. They had elaborate ways of fishing, getting their lines down directly to a certain place where they had thrown a bunch of stones in the past, where they had an underwater coaling, a place that would attract fish, to get their lines right down to that spot. They go out in the canoe, and people have told me that before. You know, how in the world do you know where to fish? Because your grandfather told you you went out in the ocean off of such pool, and you got out there until you could look right over there and see that lined up with something. Look right over there and see that lined up with something on the shore. Then you were exactly at the right spot for that pool. And so you could let down your hooks, and if you didn't catch anything, you just pull up and went away, because the school wasn't there. But if they were there, you were going to catch right away. So that's a little bit about the fishing. They have all kinds of nets and elaborate ways to catch fish, and different hooks for different fish, and different baits. They had mellow sticks, which were long hardwood sticks with cracks that had, you could just smear their favorite bait over the stick and drag it along and attract the fish that way. And another time, another cultural thing, some Wahine came in with this stick, about this long. I found this on the beach. This is. I wish I knew exactly what it was. I could smell it, and I could smell the bait in the grooves of that stick that had been out in the ocean for God only knows how long before something flew in on the beach and she found it. You could still smell the fish smell lure in that, and it was oogie. It was really, really, really hard. So we're going to move over quickly here to the luhei. Now that's not a real luhei like they usually use. As things got later in time, they seem to start doing more of a two-sided, where you've got two leho on it or two leho crowns, just a crown part. But that seems to be maybe borrowed from other cultures too. But the classic Hawaiian one had the kidney bean type stone here for the bottom that holds this thing upright, like so when you're jigging it, pulling up and down near the bottom. And then this cord is right near the front like this, so it would kind of sit like this as it moved along. It had a big hook that came up and went forward, and it had a line from the bottom of this straight over to here that supported the hook. So the big hay got on there, it just pulled loose. So this wrapping had involved a little, what would you say, there's a name for this, a kind of a button-like thing back here where the beginning of the cord was. And then you put the cord in, brought it out, and went all around. And it loops up without a knot because of this. So it's easy to take the layup off because they change the layup for different bottom conditions or different light conditions. They actually have different ones, and sometimes they burn them. Different kinds of layup have different colors. Even this, a Tiger Car, this is a real dark one, see? There's some that are just white with black spots. This is a real dark one. But they use big layup and smaller layup, and they would burn them sometimes to make them change color. And so either they could use a different one for different bottom conditions or different times of day. And try to hook them. This is just this is banana cordage. So where did I get this? It's got a crude bone hook. It's got a short staff, probably how. Some cordage that I made out of banana, just from along the beach there. A stone that I made, a pretty good weight there. It's got the groove up here on top, which is typical. And then this bone hook. So we were in Samoa, and I was supposed to give a talk to another hostel. These are older people that go on these tours and they want cultural talks and things. So I went to the beach with nothing, and I came back with this 8 hours later. So that meant I had to find a proper stone, had to find a proper hammer stone, shape this stone. Hold that moment. No, kidding. But anyway, I had to make a groove here and a groove up here. Well, this is going to be interesting on the video, yeah? This is going to be a real first on this video. Anyway, I had to cut this off. I had to make little grooves in it here and there. To make the cordage, I had to find this little fob here for this. I had to find a piece of bone. I had to find the right kind of cord. I could sharpen the piece of bone and flatten it. I had to make a hand drill, find something I could hand drill with, and drill through from both sides to drill the piece of bone. So I have a functional luhei. I found, this show. And so I had a functional luhei. And when this was finished, it would have had wilted tea leaves. You know, a wilted tea leaf gets all yellow, kind of yellow. They'd strip the wilted tea leaves and tie it on like that here. So the ones that remain, we don't see that breaks off. But that was back here. So when this thing was being used as the canoe drifted along over some bottom where they knew hay lived, then this thing, they're kind of jigging it along. And the wilted tea leaf here is kind of going like this behind this, and it looks like the membranous part of the layup is swimming along. So I'm told, never saw them do that. But that was the reason. So it just drive the hay crazy. They love to get the whole layup because they're so strong. They can get their tentacles inside of here and keep pushing the tentacle further and further on each side and break it open and eat the layup. So when the couple went off on the hay, at certain times of the year, they would go out and they might let this down and they might catch 3. One would be on there, another would be trying to get it, another would be trying to get it, and they're bringing it up. So how did they know they had the hay? So if they were fishing this by eye, where they could see the bottom, or they could spit some kukui, or chew kukui, not spit the oil on calm surface, it'll really calm the surface, and you can see down to the bottom and try to spot the hay. So the hay has little pebbles that it pushes out of its hole, and if you have a squid eye, like they call it, you can see that if you're capable of seeing it. You can see this slight disturbance in the bottom where the hay has got its hole. So you want to get this right down near the hay and jig it along. And sometimes purportedly, they'll just come boiling out of their hole. I've heard that from people, divers trying this thing under the water and see the hay just go right out to try to grab the counter. So if the water was such they couldn't see the bottom, they simply let this thing down to the bottom and then draw it up about this much. About an maybe that's not, what's this distance right here? Evie Lake is all the way here, but here, but anyway, this much, about this much up off the bottom, and then they just let the canoe drift along over the bottom while they're jigging this along like this. And the hay would see it and come out and grab it, and they feel the weight, give it a jerk, it would impale the hay, they bring it up to the canoe. Now what? Have you ever had a hold of a live hay? A hold of a live hay. So they're all over. They are between the other front, depending how big they are, and it's freaky. You know, they're just all over you. What do? You know, does anybody know what to do then?
Bite them.
Bite them right between the eyes. It just kills the hay. And I know because I tried it. This is crazy. We found one in a reef one time. It wasn't very big, and I told them that they were going to see this thing. And sure enough, killed the hay right away. So that's the story of catching the luhe. And let's see if there's anything else I missed. So I'm going to tell you about the pahi aku. Umi gave me a wonderful pahi aku. That's the pearl shell fishing lure you catch the aku with. And the woman I told you about, she said that when their village was by the shore. This was in this, fairly recent times. So that was probably, by now, 70 years ago, let's say. And she said they'd see the fish. The birds are diving. The water surface is low, the birds are diving. The aku were there, they're after the big fish. Oh, the birds would run to the beach, grab the canoe, and she and her brother had to paddle the canoe, and her grandfather would be in the back. And they were not allowed to walk. All they did was paddle. Their job was to paddle through that school. This is many times and as fast as they could. Wherever that school, they were jumping around, the birds were diving. That's their only job. And they hear their grandfather go, what did he say? Something like, Piki or something. In Hawaii, whatever it was, got it or lost it. And all they would hear, when he said, got it, they would then hear a thump. Because it had a big, strong bamboo pole and a real strong cord, which probably very common maybe in modern times now, an unstretching cord with that aku lure. The aku lure had pig bristles across the back, and what that does is it keeps it from spinning around as it's going along behind the canoe. It makes it keep skipping on the surface. And so that's what that's for. And the bright pearl shell, of course, attracts the fish that hit it. And if the hook is strong enough, and you can grab it. So inflexible pole, inflexible line. And so as soon as it struck, he'd jerk it right out of the water. The fish can't fight it anymore, can't fight the hook, can't pull the other way. No, as soon as it struck, whoop, he's out of the water, you bring it up, swing it in such a way that the fish would come under his left arm. He'd take the hook out with his right hand and open his arm, and they'd hear the thunk into the bottom of the canoe. So they knew what was happening, but they could only hear their grandfather's call and the thump. Either legally he lost it or he got it, and then they hear the thump. And so this went on until finally the school dived down the weather for the story to hear. They said, oh yeah, he had an ipu too. He had a ipu, kind of an ola-type ipu with open front and tied to the iako, and then they stuff all this line in there. So when you do that, instead of coiling it up, if you just stuff it in the ipu, then you pull it out again. It never has a knot. It just comes out. So that was another really cool thing. So three things from one woman that walked by because I had all my show and tell stuff, and it spurred her memory of being a young girl at the fishing. That was really cool. So how about any questions on this before we eat? Good chance to ask questions, if anything. Everybody's looking really hungry.
Sorry, I don't know if I missed it, but what kind of bone did you use for your hooks?
This one here, the one that I found on the beach, this?
Yeah,
there's no telling, because it was Cook Islands, maybe Samoa. It would probably have just been, something from ordinary, who knows what, just something floating in the ocean. And so that's common on beaches now. You find different kinds of bones. Extremely unlikely to be human bone. There's one thing I wanted to talk about too. was making the holes, and we talked about that yesterday, but for any of you who weren't here yesterday, how did they make a hole in the rail? This is hard, this is like China. Really smooth, it makes it great for you doing woodwork. We're going to talk about that later. This is a fantastic burnishing tool if it's perfectly smooth. But anyway, these things, if you see broken ones on the inside, it's been popped out on the inside. It hasn't been drilled. Just like when a BB hits a plate glass window and you got a little mark on this side and a big out the other side. Conchoidal fracture, they call it. That's what's inside of these things. So somehow they were made by percussion, not drilling. Yeah. How did they do those little holes like that? And as I said yesterday, it depends on your own monopoly. But sometimes you get information in interesting ways. So they were doing a combine, I repeat, but for the they were doing a corridor for a highway down in kind of a common area. So they archaeological surveyed this whole thing, and they found a burial of a fisherman who had one leg, which maybe he'd survived a bad wound in battle or a shark bite or something, and amputation, lived through it, and was a one-legged fisherman. And then he had his tools with him. So here was the tools of the fisherman. So different fish hooks, there was different shells, a bunch of these shells, and there was one really strange stone that was about this size. It was kind of flat on the bottom and fairly pointy at the top, just about the size of what I'm showing you right now. And nicely made, rounded, pecked out, polished a little bit, made a long, hard stone. It's that, and what's it doing in the fisherman's kit? So I know all kinds of tools, I've tried all kinds of experimental archaeology. What would it be? We had the Lego shells right there, different ones. Maybe that's how they made the hole. I made one of those stones like that. But as you heard me yesterday, kind of class, we had 13 Lego shells like this. We'd never done it before. And one kid would make a little spot in the dirt or in the grass like that, and hold the shell firmly. And then I had a little hammer stone, and I'd go over with that tool and go. 12 out of 13, right out of the box. Had my hole. I took one of those little conical shells I told you about that have a rough edge, rub it around the hole, the ground is smoothed up. Top. I think the answer came from that photograph, that burial that was uncovered. So today we say, oh, wait, okay, we shouldn't even touch that burial, but they're going to do it for archaeological surveys. And we should never show what was in there. But because we did see what was in there, we now have a piece of information that otherwise would be unknown. So, what I would say is, different ways of doing things. Sometimes they may provide us information in very unusual ways that we don't understand. So that's just my own. But in this case, I think a very strange question was answered because of what was looked at with the fishermen. So, any more questions? Anything?
The question, what kind of bones are those hooks made of?
This is cow bone. I have a little bone. I just use cow bone for that. I could have had maybe some deer bone, but when you want a bigger piece, it's pretty thin. I could have used deer bone maybe. And when I look at that so thin like that, that's a possibility, because cow bone is pretty thick, but deer bone is a good possibility, or goat or something like that. A smaller mammal that's not as thick as a cow bone. So if you wanted to do this, I would suggest you get something, even an elk is too big, it's too thick, just like cow bone too. But for smaller animals like a goat, a wild sheep, a mature one, or deer, then you could get some bone like that. Anything else? Any questions of any kind? Anybody? Anything? Okay. Mahalo. Three ways of catching sharks. One was with a hook. from an ordinary canoe, and one was with a great big noose from a great big double canoe far out in the ocean to catch great white sharks, and they actually did do that. So to start off with, the bait type of hook was like this. They'd take a root or limb, that's a type of tree in Hawaii, bend it around when it was young and put stakes so that it would slowly grow in a shape like this. You've got to have the grain going all the way around here so that it doesn't snap right here. If you cut it out of the board, it would snap. The Hawaiian hook, this is just a facsimile, a little too big perhaps. It had these 3 or 4 grooves up here, and it had a whalebone point, like that. And 2 things were unique. This was unique to Hawaii because everybody else's hooks either had a knob or a ring up here to tie the line onto it. The shark's teeth could easily get into that, break it. And it also had mortising. In other words, they cut into the end of this hook here and shaped this piece here so it would fit into that carved out mortise. And another narrow mortise, shallow mortise here, in which to put the olana, that really, really strong Hawaiian cordage, to wrap this into place, and probably some gum or glue as well. But this protected this wrapping, and then up here they'd have a whole bunch of olana, all these long fibers of incredibly strong raw olana, hanging down this way, tie it real tight around here, and then they'd flip it around this way and tie it real tight again. And then you'd have a whole lot of olana that you could begin to make an 8-ply braid. But they did one more unique thing, and that was they would take other olana cordage and make armor on the outside of what they had just done with those grooves. Armor like this. This is from a fishing weight, but it's the same kind of thing. So the olana was then braided like this. It's like a Kevlar armor, and it gradually went up into the 8-ply braid. And the shark just couldn't get hold of that with their teeth and break loose from the hook. So that was another unique thing in Hawaii, very remarkable. The actual hooks were more about this size. And that's made from kauai. That's a real good wood for weapons. But the kauai tree has really gnarly limbs. They just grow all around, all curved and crooked. And if you look through about 200 trees, you might find a dead limb which has a natural curve. The grain of the wood goes right around here in an arc, and the shark is not going to break that. Kauai is real strong. It was used for paddles and other tools. Real, real strong. If it had flaws in it like this, it really didn't matter. The kauai is so strong that this hook will work. I made this with traditional tools, not modern tools. It's all finished and polished with traditional tools. I need to cut out the mortise here, make the hook out of whalebone, and then make the grooves here, and I'd have this finished. Can I do it with traditional tools? Yes, it would just take me a long time. So that's the making of the shark hook. So the baiting, then you could chum anywhere where sharks were, or where sharks are gathered around, and put some bait on a hook, like a piece of tuna or something. And a cord made out of olana is going to hold any shark. And so they could catch them that way with a big sharp hook. The shark, by the way, doesn't notice the wood hook. They can't feel electromagnetic feeling they might have from a metal hook. So they much more readily would take the Hawaiian bone or wood and bone hooks than modern metal hooks, I do believe. So the other method is really interesting because they go out in an ordinary canoe, close to the water, and chum or maybe beat on the side of the canoe with their paddles, or use sort of a coconut shell rattle made on a hoop of wood like they did in Micronesia, but in some way to attract the shark up near the canoe, give it some food or whatever to get it to come up near the canoe. If they could get their hand on the head of the shark, it sort of mesmerizes the shark. That sounds crazy, but I have seen actual modern videos where they get a great white shark to lift its head out of the water. Other sharks don't do that. But if they get their hand on the nose or head of that great white shark, it just mesmerizes the shark. It's sort of like it's goofy or paralyzed. So they get their hand on the shark, and this is old Hawaiian writing, and written in Hawaiian and translated. They get their hand on the head of the shark and get the shark kind of mesmerized by the boat. A shark 1, 2, 3, or 4 anana long. And an anana is 6 feet long. A 4 anana shark is 24 feet long. That's a huge shark. and get it mesmerized like that. And then they had to be able to get a noose over the shark. And the way they did that, they either replaced their hand with their foot so their hands were free, or even with their cheek, like this, so their hands were free. And then they take the noose out and slip it over the nose of the shark and back to the gills where the fins are. But they used their hands this way, because their hands were white on the inside and the shark might snap at their hands as it went past their eyes. They'd use their hands this way. They're very dark on the back. Slip the noose on, back by the fins of the shark, jerk the noose tight, and off the canoe would go on a huge sleigh ride. It was a smaller shark, they'd catch it real quick. It was a big shark, it probably took all day. That was one way. Then they'd get a whole bunch of foodstuffs and a whole flotilla of canoes so they could last out in the water there for days and days at a time. They took a bunch of bundles of fermenting food, probably fermenting poi and sweet potatoes and other things. And they'd go way out in the ocean 4 or 5 days to where there was a current. They knew the great whites would follow those currents. The sharks could smell a little bit of food scent or blood in the water for many, many, many miles. So eventually they'd throw these in the water, and eventually the shark would come, a great white shark would come, and they'd start throwing the bundles of fermented food. And what I think that did was create gas inside the shark that would make it stay up. If you got tired of trying to swim down, it would stay up, and they could get closer to it and make it more sluggish that way also. And so eventually they could get to the point, like it shows right here, where they could steer the canoe. They had steering paddles and a sail. Steer the canoe right where they had a great big noose and some weights to hold it down, and no doubt something to spring it out, and get where it would go right over the shark. And once it did, they jerked the noose tight, and then the huge great white would pull the whole canoe all over the place. But once they could pull it backwards, that will drown a shark and kill it. Then they could get it to shore. So skinning the shark is very, very difficult. I've done it with modern tools. It's incredibly difficult. But they somehow managed to do that with their shark's tooth knives, maybe pieces of obsidian or other tools, and eventually get the jaw of the shark. You've got the upper teeth and the lower teeth. The upper teeth are the really big cutters. And so this is what you had over here. And the great white sharks have a triangular tooth like that. A typical great white type tooth, just like. Okay. So I'm gonna, right here, I want to tell you a couple things that came to mind. The belly of the shark is the white skin. The belly of the shark is something underneath that's looking up toward the white surface. Doesn't see the shark so easily, and then from above, of course, it's great. But the belly skin is thinner. It's a little thinner and it's white. So that's for the top of the pond. That's what you use for the top of the pond. So Kehau and I, her kubu, was, the shark was one of her omaku. Now that's important. We've probably all heard about those kind of things and so on. So it's not like all sharks are everybody's omaku. The shark is some families omaku, and in some families it's not. Paio, or it's pueo, or it's waiula, or it's io, or pueo, whatever. So it all depends on your family, or mixes. Sometimes you got something one side of the family, one side of the other, but the family pay more attention to one particular one for whatever reason. And you're omaku. So it's not like every alaya, or every alaya is your omaku, every way is your omaku. No, certain ones in your family. So in her family, the shark, Mano, was omaku. So in her Mano, at least from her ohana, she could not go and catch a shark. She could not receive the shark. We could go and get the shark and get the eating and give it back to her because she had a mother that she was uniki, kumuru. So she wanted that shark skin, and she wanted me to show them how to cure it and how they would use it. So I had never skinned a shark before, and she'd been trying for years to get Kaʻimiloa. And what happens is the fishermen, either they want nothing to do with it because they don't want that scent on their boat or on themselves or on their gear, which scares other fish away, or they do catch the mano purposely or accidentally. What do? They get the knife and they slit open the belly to see what's in it, right? And the incredible things have been found inside of sharks. They'll eat almost anything. A suit of armor was found in a shark. They found parts of people and tattoos identifying who was killed because it's all murder mysteries because they found something inside of a shark. So anyway, somebody called her from Hawaii and said, we've caught a shark, an 11-foot tiger shark. So we must have called her in the morning when the boat came in. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, on Saturday morning, we get a phone call. Hello? This is Miss Coley. You need to go to Hawaii. She didn't say, are you awake? Are you hungover? Do you have any gas in your car? She didn't say, can you go? She said, you need to go to Hawaii. So what did we do? We went to Hawaii. And so that was the big shark, hanging up all lots of people all around. And the shark had been eating a turtle, so it spit up parts of the turtle just as they got it into the harbor. I knew that. Somebody had already taken the jaws, somehow or another. Somebody had the jaws already. So it's hanging up. So here's all these people, and here's these strangers coming in, you know. And we just walked right up to the shark. So that's not necessarily what a lot of people would think was a cool thing to do. And so I had to simply say, we were sent here by Kaʻimiloa, my name is so-and-so, this is my wife. We are to take the belly skin of the shark, and everyone just please be quiet for a minute for some pule. So I just did pule, thanked the mano for using the skin, who we are, why we're there, what we're going to use the skin for. And so then I commenced to start trying to take the skin. I've skinned all kinds of stuff. I was skinned an alligator. That was the toughest thing I ever skinned. Not even close to skinning that 11-foot mono. I had the best knives. I really know knives. I have the best sharpening tools. It was really a bitch to skin. It's the belly skin, which is not as thick as the rest. And underneath the skin, the meat is absolutely just stuck to that skin. So you don't see aged sharks with wrinkles like me. No, you see all smooth, and that's because all the little muscles are completely attached to the skin. So it's not like a deer where you lift up the skin and just keep going like this, taking the skin off. It was fight your way the whole way, all the way to get the skin. I finally had the whole belly skin. It took me, what, 3.5 hours just to get that one, get 11-foot tiger shark. So now we had it, we took it back, then what? So you tack out the skin on a big board, stretch it out, but you need to clean it very, very carefully. I'm just digressing for a minute. You need to scrape off and clean any little bit of meat or anything that could rot off the inside of that skin, and then tack it out with the flesh side up. And then you need to put something on it to preserve it and keep bugs out. And the thing you put on is borax, powdered borax. And borax adds soap, not only the salt. Do not put salt. If you use salt, it will do the same thing. It will dry up the skin. It will shrink up real good. You make the pahu. Every time it gets wet, the pahu will because the salt will soak up moisture. If you use that borax, it will poison it against bugs. It will dry it, and it will not cause it to change at moisture times if it's made into a pahu. So the biggest part is right here, and that went to her to make the pahu for her paniki. And then the part up here is the next biggest, and that's what went to make the top of hers when she unikied, because she gave that part and this part back here to us. So that part went to her pahu. The small part back here, I made a iki in a class. That's a small drum, like a bongo drum, I believe. And that rest of that skin then worked for the iki. So that's what that skin was used for. So all these kinds of things, these miraculous things. I've heard amazing stories about sharks. The friend that gave me my name, I really think he told me that he had ridden on the back of a shark across the Kaʻimiloa Bay, I think. But there are other stories like that, of somebody being saved by the Aumakua shark. The Aumakua shark drove away a shark that was trying to eat them. They were shipwrecked, or their canoe went down or something, and the shark came along and they rode its back all the way to shore. Now, we could say that was a big whale shark. They're not a man-eater or anything. A huge shark, but they do come up near the surface sometimes. And who knows, maybe if a human body, just like you put your hand on the nose of the shark, a human body gets up on the shark and holding on to the dorsal fin like riding a horse, For all we know, maybe that does kind of make the shark want to stay up on the surface and likes that warm feeling and just kind of swim along, and the person can still breathe air and they get to land. But there are stories like that in Hawaii and in modern times. And people feed the sharks. If you're Hamakua, one of my hula brothers in the first halau I was in said his grandma at Molokai, at Kaʻimiloa, there was kind of a coconut grove there, and she would go down there periodically. I don't know how she called it, but this shark would come right into shore and she would feed it. That's an Hamakua shark. And so there's plenty of stories like that about a shark that would come, or somebody that would trade a shark and they'd meet on the side of the canoe with their paddle or something, and it would come and help them catch fish. Or barracuda, help them catch fish, scare the fish in their net, and then they give some of the fish to the shark or the barracuda. That sounds crazy to us. We don't know. We just don't know the ways of those old times, and we don't know the mentality and things of old people, like I said. How much power did some people have to communicate with animals or sharks or things? We can't comprehend it. We have not been trained that way, we haven't experienced that way. But we're all talking about those kinds of chicken skin things that I have little doubt that some people, the pueo comes. I've had that, I've had the pueo eo talk to me. I've had them come right over my head and just hover there. I'm talking, it's talking to me. I can't explain that. I can't explain it. I don't know. But plenty of other people have those kinds of experiences too. So the shark was both an enemy and a protector. The shark was very useful, also to be feared. I've never heard of Hawaiians tipping over their canoe and then being attacked by a shark. Where were they attacked by sharks? Surfing. Surfing. When people went surfing in the old days, everybody went. It was just like now. Nobody going to school on a good surf day, right? When the surf was good, everybody, commoners and chiefs, chiefesses, everybody. Some of the chiefesses were the best surfers. They'd all been down at the beach. When they came back from the beach from surfing, what did people ask them? Were the waves any good? Did you see Kimo? They said, were there any sharks? Because people did get attacked by the sharks surfing. And people did lose arms and legs. People did get killed and things for the sharks, but primarily of surfing, I think, and I'm kind of going off my talk schedule here, but I think the reason they did get attacked if their canoe went over was several things. One, they knew exactly what to do. They could all swim like fish. They didn't panic. They knew exactly what to do. They didn't have any metal, so they didn't make noise. When the canoe went over, there wasn't any clanging or banging. There was nothing metal coming around making noises. They all knew exactly what to do. 42 different methods of riding a canoe in the old times, according to oral history. 42 methods, depending on how many people were in the canoe and what kind of canoe was it. How big was it? Did it have double hull or single hull? Did it have one mast or two masts? They had all these different ways of riding the canoe, because if they didn't, they were dead. They were just going to die. And you don't hear much about people like that just dying. They would manage to get the thing back up again. So we're going to talk about ipulei, floating, and other things about the canoe that were different than what we do today. So if they weren't thrashing around in the water, they weren't shouting at each other, there was no metal banging around, there was nothing to attract the shark. The shark didn't even know the canoe at all. So when you make a commotion, you make a lot of noise, vibration in the water, yell and scream, thrash around, clang around with metal things, that's when the shark knows there's something that come and they may get some money. So, let's talk about the shark catching the teeth. We're going to get that when we get into the making of the weaponry. I'm going to talk about how to convert fossil tooth, like a great white, into what looks like a true modern great white tooth, because it's very, very hard to get. So we'll talk about that before too long. See if there's anything else I missed about that.
Only thing is, video.
Stabilizing the teeth. I mentioned that in some of the other videos. It's going to show this glue, and it's cyanoacrylate glue. That means like super glue. It goes off real easy, but it's super, super thin. It's called hot stuff. You get it online. Half a 1 ounce or 2 ounce bottle. Keep it in the refrigerator. It lasts a long time if you keep it in the refrigerator. Anyway, the red label one is incredibly thin. It'll just go right into the least little crack or something. So when you get shark's teeth, and the same with the dog's teeth, you get something in one of these videos that's going to show it, a little tool that you can pick up a minute amount of the glue all at once, and you put it right where the enamel part of the shark's tooth meets the base part. Put it right there, it'll run right in underneath the enamel. It's especially important on that small cusp on the backside of the tiger shark tooth, but also at the front edge too. Get some of that in. I do that with all my teeth. I don't care if they're ivory looking or they're white. Especially if they're white, I'm going to do it every tooth. I'm going to put a little bit on the base and let it soak into the base because some of that may be somewhat immature too. If you get by with a little more immature teeth, if you get by with a little more immature teeth by doing that, just taking that extra step. But there's nothing worse than making some beautiful weapon and then you go by one day and here's this cusp that fell off one of the teeth, or even worse, the whole enamel part falls off the tooth. I've had both of those things happen. So I've learned to just put a little bit of that on all the tooth when you get them, before you put them away, because otherwise you put them away, you come back in 2 years, and there's all this funny little dust and stuff inside the bag, and all the dog's teeth are cracked, things touch are cracked. That stuff will go right down in the cracks, and if you first time you see the slightest little crack, or especially with shark's teeth, you use that glue, and cyanoacrylate goes off by moisture. So all you have to do is put it in there. Don't get your lip on there. Trust me, you don't want to do that. But just a little breath, and it'll set it off, and you'll get something very much stabilized. So I use that stuff all the time. Let's see what else. We're going to get, we did really get into that, as I say, recreating the replica teeth from that one, but we will get into that later. So where are we now? We're about right on time. Okay. So let's go even later. Some of you at least wanted to know how to make it. I know a whole lot about Hawaiian emus. That was a long journey for me, about 15 years. And I finally moved to the Big Island where it was very hard to grow because it was so wet. It's not a good place. You need a place that's got good rainfall for a couple of months, a lot of water, or by some Hawaii or something. And then it's really going to dry out, a lot of good sun. And then you'll get the really well filled out and really hard, good ipu. So when they made the ipulei, which is a container for fish hooks for the fishermen, and that's different than an ipulei, like our video is going to show. An ipulei, L-E-I, is like a long oval gourd with another gourd which happens to be of the right size, and when you cut it, the neck part, it'll fit right over the neck of the other one. And so that's an ipulei. Then you put your feather legs and things like that in that narrow, elongated gourd. An ipulei is this fat little bottom and an even fatter top in a net that the fishermen put all their precious fish hooks and fish lines in there. The hooks usually already fixed up with a really good snood with olana. So very, very valuable. Pearl shell, turtle shell, things like that to make these hooks with great labor and maybe generationally old. So they sure didn't want to lose those. They didn't want a seabird to come down if it was baited and take the whole thing away because it's all it ate. So that's what the ipulei was for. So what we're going to do now is look at a video about making ipulei, and that was the best way that I could show you folks. Maybe we'll just pause for a second, if I can. Come on, hang on. Yes, just a second. I'll talk about another thing. So some of the ipulei with the video, but they would use a gourd for the bottom part and the top part. So that's very valid. Or a nice wood bowl, preferably cold, with KOU cold wood for the bottom. Easy to carve comparatively, and strong and lovely. And then the ipu on the top was lighter. So you've got a heavier part on the bottom, lighter part on the top. The top is held in place by this knot, neatly into place, snugged onto the bottom. And what you want also is something that float. So if you have ipu, it doesn't have as much flotility as if you had wood in ipu. And this part was stronger. So if you have to step on it, somebody stumbled in the canoe or something, it's not as likely to get broken if the bottom is made with ipu. Sometimes they put a ha-ha belly, a fancy wrap of cord around different parts of the bottom to make it stronger, and that may show up in some of the pictures. So let's look at that one real quick. I think this was probably going to be about 25 minutes. This is a bad time to show anybody a video for 25 minutes as close to lunchtime. Okay, so I got my squirt gun, it has vinegar in it. If I see anybody sleeping with the squirt gun with vinegar. But anyway, try to stay awake and you'll see something about making it late, because I could do that. I could do a workshop here. I just had to do it at the moment to show you. So you'll learn a good bit from this video. Okay, now nobody going to sleep, right? We're going to keep the lights on. That's the magic. We're going to keep the lights on. The problem is hearing. I think you understand you're hearing the voice of the computer that's still on the screen, so it's harder to hear. So if you can't hear, please raise your hand, say something. Don't try to watch the whole thing. You can't even hear it.
Sometimes when it's on too long, the machine just disregards
Really?
it. So you
So the machine,
no, it just goes to sleep and you don't like wake
I don't
up.
go to sleep, so I can sleep.
Yeah, and you don't like wake up either.
Anyway, so I'll talk to you a little bit about the Hawaiian ipu. The Hawaiians had more ipu, more uses of ipu than any other people on earth, probability. There's a really good book from back in the 40s by Ernest Dodge called Hawaiian and Other Polynesian Gorge Bible. Fantastic. It's got all kinds of pictures of ipu, all kinds of gorge. It's got a chart of gorge, use of gorge and the names that they call it for all these different Polynesian cultures. You get to Hawaii, you got a little mark this used for this. Hawaii, great line of check marks of all the things they used it for. Because they had no bottom. Everything from birth to death was ipus. Little, ipus. The Y you bring in for hadam. Death, people, babies were sometimes put in ipu the way of. Okay, so here's the ipu problem. There's one up there that's ipu plus ipu. Here's what opens up. So the net comes around. The net is fixed to the bottom. It comes around the top. There it has a draw cord at the top, so you can cinch it up tight and carry it or tie it to the side of the canoe, or they often remove or whatever.
That the Hawaiians used for their precious fish hooks. The fishermen often, probably almost always had an ipu. An ipu means a gourd. Ipu means gourd in Hawaiian. It means a gourd with another piece of gourd as a cap on it to put in things like feather legs and that sort of thing. But ipu is what this is. This is the hook container. So the containers were usually made either with two gourds. So you'd have a bottom part like a bowl and a top part that was bigger than fit over the bottom part. And then that was all held together by a net with a loop at the top that you would hold. But more often they had a wooden bottom and then a gourd top. So they had gourds of all kinds in Hawaii. Huge numbers of gourds. The hard part is finding a gourd that's real round and the right size. And they're not a problem as far as being hard, because the good Hawaiian gourds are relatively thin and they're really hard, really strong, wonderful gourds. So I think one of the major reasons that they were made with wood plus a gourd was the gourd was light enough easily taken out of the netting, but the wooden bottom, and especially would float. So the hooks with their attached snoods, the cords that were on the hooks that were then wound up and put into here, multiple hooks for different purposes inside the container. If it fell overboard or in a sudden whirlwind threw the thing out of the canoe or the canoe overturned, it would still float because the hooks were incredibly precious. They were so hard to make They might have belonged to the fisherman's father or grandfather or great-grandfather. So they, in Hawaiian terms, they had an awful lot of mana in addition to all the work that went into making them. So what it did, if the hooks were baited, it also kept seabirds from coming down and grabbing the baited hook and running off with it, which would be a disaster too. So there were multiple reasons why they used this. They could carry them all easily around. They could hang them on the side of the canoe, put them in the bottom of the canoe and still be relatively safe from paddles or spears and things. So that's the people linking. So the Hawaiians would drill some holes around the top of the bowl in order to fit a cord on here, a couple of turns of cordage, and then they'd use the cordage to start making a net that was of the right size and base size to go around the top. The problem is that almost none of us know how to do that. And so what we've got to do is get some old netting like this. This I got at some thrift store probably in Hawaii a long time ago, but it's old-time netting that's been soaked in kukui sap. The kukui has a little bit of waxy substance in it, and it also has a good stain. So it darkens the net, the fish can't see it so easily, but it also probably preserves the net to some degree. So you don't want to make this with a modern nylon net or a modern white cotton net that you get as a decoration. Try to get some old netting like this. So then what are we going to do? We've got to try to pick, are we going to get netting like this, that's real tightly woven? It looks great. Make a ikulele out of this. It looks just great. But there's so many little eyes and you have to attach it so much to the bottom that I prefer to use one like this. It's not quite as pretty. It's easier to do. And so then the trick is you've got to find netting of a certain size. When you stretch out one of these eyes, or maha as they're called in Hawaiian, stretch this all the way out this knot as far apart as from that knot. That's the size of the net opening. At least I think I'm saying that right. And in this case, it's about 3.5 or 3 3/4 inches when you pull it all the way out, the two knots furthest apart here and here. But it comes out about right, because if you pull this out into a diamond shape, it's about 2 inches across, up and across. And it looks pretty good. Or you can pull it up a little higher, it still looks pretty good on here. So this is right at the bottom of the net, and it's got a double cord tied in there. So that gives it extra strength. And in our case, we really like to have the extra strength at the top where the net comes up and you've got a draw cord there. When you pull up on the draw cord, we probably would have a couple of loops, or at least a way you could tie it. Pull up on the draw cord, that's putting a lot of strain on the top of the netting, and so having a double row at the top is a good thing. So the best way we could do this would be to use this netting, which I've only got this way for illustration, but turn it upside down. So this part is at the top. So then we have to decide how much netting we need, and we don't want to use netting that has a repaired place like this. See these knots? Something happened to the net. There's another place right up here where there's a hole in the net. They're just missing a spot for some reason. So you want a section of good net that's intact, and then you're going to have the right distance that goes around the gourd, and you're going to have the right distance that goes up the side of the gourd to where the drawstring will pull it up and hold the gourd in perfect position on this. So how are we going to do all that? The first thing we've got to do is cut the gourd, and I'm going to show that a little later in this video. So I've looked through a whole bunch of my gourds. I found one that's pretty round. There's a lot of them that aren't so round. They're a little more triangular because of the nature of the gourd, or they grew on the ground and they're a little bumpy. You want one like this that's pretty round and pretty darn symmetrical. So I cut this off at one time or another for some other purpose, but it's not cut off directly across. It's not perfectly cut. So we want something that, this looks good up here all the way around. It looks good on the sides. It's very symmetrical, and it's round, so it'll fit onto the round bowl, because today's bowls, even the old bowls, are round. And that gets to be a trick, trying to make this fit, so we'll talk about that. In any case, this is a pretty typical Hawaiian gourd. It looks like it's about 5/16 of an inch thick, but it's cut at a slight angle, so it's really only about 1/4 inch thick. It's been soaked with seawater and a little bit of borax thrown in to preserve the gourd, because Hawaii where you've got a lot of little boring bugs, they'll just play hell with the inside of the gourd. They'll eat up all the soft stuff inside, make holes to the outside and make the gourd extremely fragile. So soaking it for about a week in some kind of solution, particularly seawater, or taking sea salt and mixing it with water and soaking it. And maybe add a little powdered borax, like I said, will poison it against bugs, and it'll also help to clean out the whole inside. So that's a little bit about the gourds, and we're going to go back to the bottom. So this one is a typical tourist type bowl. Find these all the time in Hawaii. And here's another one. This is a little better one here. This is a Koma bowl, and this will be monkey pot. So Koma bowl is going to cost a lot more than a monkey pot bowl, but these are the ones in all the tourist spots in Hawaii. But see how it has a flat bottom and it's not very high? You can use that. It's a pretty nice bowl, but not the best thing. We much rather have, as you saw in these illustrations in the Arts and Crafts book, Arts and Crafts of Hawaii, one like this. It's got some more height, a little more bulk. It would have a lot of flotility because there's more wood to it. And so if we're going to work this one, we have to have something that fits down over this lip here, all the way around. About a ½ inch down on this lip is about where we want the top to fit. And that means the net has to be attached about an inch down or so, maybe 3/4 of an inch down. Because you want the net line to be perfectly symmetrical around here where it's attached, so that when you put the top on, it goes right straight on evenly. It doesn't tip over this way or over this way or over this way or this way because there's too big a hole in the top, or because you put your cords in too low down. So you want the cord just to be in the right place to fit that top that we're going to talk about later, about cutting it just right and shaping it with a file. So that's going to be the bottom. That's going to be the bottom. This one I'll sand a little bit, refinish it. But that's going to be the bottom for the ipuheki, or excuse me, the ipuleki. So what about the tools? Tools are really important. In cutting a gourd, that's what I'm at subject right now. I've used everything. I've had stitches, every imaginable thing, but you want a real fine tooth saw. Something that's right about like a pretty fine hacksaw blade. This is the kind they use for drywall. You can press through the drywall and cut a little slot to make your light switch or whatever. But these are not too hard to find. You can always find them on eBay and things like that. For somewhere around $5 or $8 or so. But they're ideal because you can see the blade. You can see the blade. The blade needs to be straight, not bent. And this one is even better because I can see the blade. It's straight. It's got a little bit coarser teeth, like a real coarse hacksaw blade. And the main thing is I can hold it well, and I can see the blade when I'm working it. I've cut the tops off of an awful lot of gourds, and I can tell you it is not easy, especially when the gourd is round and slick, and you're cutting on an edge of the gourd, around an edge of the gourd instead of right on the high spot. So pretty soon we're going to get to that part. Then you need a couple other things. You need a ruler. You need something like this. It's just a flexible tape measure, so you can measure around the bottom of this. By measuring around here, I can get a pretty good idea of how big this needs to be. If you're real good at eyeballing, you can look at it and hold it up and say, I can see it. It needs to be cut about here to fit ½ an inch down on that rim. So if you really want to be more exact about it, the ones that have had some kind of way to do that, you need some kind of a caliper device like that. Some way to measure it, but they would have had something like this. So you can measure how big this is, like this. Say we want it to come down ½ an inch, then we want to measure right about here. Yeah. And then we take this and measure that distance with the ruler. Right? And now we got some idea of where we need to be on the gourd. So the gourd needs to be bigger. The cut place on the gourd needs to be bigger than that, right? Because we want it to go down onto the bowl to the point that we talked about. The bowl is called the umeki in Hawaii. So that's what gave me this initial line right here, this lower line. Somewhere about there was I've got my initial line And what I did was then look at the people with a pencil, the gourd, and keep looking at the top and looking at the sides, and keep turning it with my pencil, turning it till I thought I had the best possible line here that's parallel with this top. Even with the top. And since this is a pretty symmetrical gourd, that's going to work out pretty good. And then I drew a couple of other lines. This is probably where I want to cut, actually. And then this is where I may need to take it down a little further. But it's way better to cut the gourd with the hole a little too small and a little too big. So cut it a little too small, because then we're going to take a rasp and rasp in here. And then you can open this hole up more and more and more. You could open it up clear out to here if you wanted to, but you want to leave a little bit of thickness just for strength. But it's easy with a half-round coarse rasp to rasp this out. And that way, if it's not quite round, you can round it out so it'll fit onto here better. So pretty soon we're going to get to that part about cutting it as an important aspect. So then once you've cut this out, and you've got it so that it fits onto here about a half an inch down onto the bowl, right? Now you're going to want to drill some holes a little lower than that to fix the net onto. And so, again, probably about 3/4 of an inch down, possibly as much as an inch down, is where you're going to fixate the netting to the bowl. So the old ones in the museum, they've only got 4 or 5 series of holes. You need a double hole so you can run the cord in and back out to tie around the net. So you need double holes, so that they only had 4 or 5, and then they would connect a whole series of cords, just like these here, would be connected to those 4 or 5 holes for knotting, for tying it on. But that makes an irregular bottom, and we want a nice even bottom, that when the gourd goes on there, it sits in place real evenly. So the best way to do that is to see how many knots you're going to have, how many loops you're going to have going all the way around here. This is about 16.5 inches around. So say you've got 2 inches of space between each knot. You're going to have about 8 sets of holes, and then you've got to work that out, just play around with the ruler as you make where you want your holes to be, and then how far apart you want them to be so they'll be even, and you come up with the right number to tie the net on there. So if you need 8 of these spaces to make 16 inches around here, you're going to have 9 knots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 knots for the 8 spaces. So you got to remember that too. But you drill 2 holes about 1/4 inch apart, maybe 1/16 or 3/32 holes on a line that you've marked all the way around here, and then you've got your evenly spaced spaces. So laying all this out is the critical part. The rest is easy. Once you've got all the spaces, you drill 2 holes, maybe, like I said, 1/4 inch apart or so at the locations that you want to tie on all the knots of the net. So you've got to have enough net to go all the way around here, and then because the upper part of the net will readily stretch out from this spacing, it'll readily stretch out. All you need is enough net to reach up to the top where you want the drawstring to be. So it's a little more complex than it sounds like when you first think about this thing. It seems like a simple thing. It's not so simple. To tie the net onto the bowl, I like something like this, real strong linen cord that you can use just about anything. A small thin hemp cord is easy to get at Walmart and things. That makes a good tie too. So anything to just neatly knot on the netting to this. And as I say, in the case if I was doing this, then I would cut how much netting I needed, which will be about 6 or 7 inches here, 6 or 7 inches up, maybe up to about here. And then I would cut that off just above the knot. And then I'd turn this over the other way so that I'd tie each of these knots around here. And then I'd have this double line of cord at the top where I could put in my draw cord. So that pretty much covers that. And I think we mentioned both kinds of bowls and this. So I'm going to now show you how to cut the gourd. That's the tricky part. and then all the rest of it would be doing exactly what I talked about. You could, sand off, you could use a little bit of oxalic acid with solution to get rid of some of this staining. Probably, you could use some real fine sandpaper, steel wool to polish your board, then put some mineral oil on it to make it look real nice. And that's about it for licking. So we'll turn on down to cutting off the top of the cord.
Now we're going to talk about the cut.
Okay, so now we're going to cut the ipu, the cord, and that's my favorite tool, like I said. It's got a little bit rougher teeth, but they do grab pretty well, so I've always found it best to be like this. Sit down, get somewhere where you can get the cord in your extra pair of hands. Your legs and your feet are your extra pair of hands. And any person at old times would have known that. So I'm going to try to cut this along this line. But I'm not sure that's really where I want to be. So I've got my initial line that simply just set me up for parallel from here to here all the way around. That's my initial line. Then I decided, well, this is about right. This line here is about right to match that bowl after I use my calipers and measuring. But I'm going to cut here. See that? I'm not going to cut where I think the line is going to be. I'm going to cut here.
Further down, then I think I
Because
should.
that gives me some leeway.
Cut through
Always rasp this down. This is not hard to rasp down. And always open up the hole. But if I cut and it's too big, I'm stuck. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to use my thumbnail to help keep the blade right where I want it to be. So I start it lightly. Get started. Once you get started, then you just keep eyeballing your line. But real slow and easy. Slow, 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 slow. What I'm trying to do is eyeball this blade and make sure it's running right on that line. See how it's stuck right there? You just got to move real slow. Real slow. But I've got it where I can eyeball right straight down that line and right down the blade of my saw. And you can't do this with a hacksaw. You can't see where you're going. And what I'm trying to do is make a little cut all the way around. My hand, my left arm is tucked, or my right arm tucked up against my side, so that my hand becomes like a little machine. It just keeps moving, while my left hand moves the board.
Two extra hands on holding it. And this hand is helping the guy with the formula. And it's really going around like this.
And that's your test. You start to get very easy. You want to go too fast? Don't do it. Just keep going real slow. Okay, so that's enough to show you how it goes. But you want to get this light cut through the hard outer shell all the way around. Then you just keep coming along and cutting a little deeper, a little deeper. Once you get the initial cut line, it's real easy to cut on through. You just want to make sure you stay right with that line. And pretty soon you'll have the whole top off of there. So there it is. That's what we've done. We've made the little light line all the way around. I'm just stopping now just for demonstration. All the way around. And then come back and saw carefully straight on your line. And pretty soon you'll get through it. You just got to make sure you don't run off of your line. Just start in really easy. Follow the ring around 2 or 3 times until you finally get to the point that you can just saw line on through. And then you'll have the perfect cut and you won't have cracked the top of your board. So once you get it done, let's just pretend this is my half-round rasp, the coarse rasp. Half-round just means it's got a little bit of a dome to it. That's real good to do on the inside of this. So let's just say that this is this cut. And I'm going to take my rasp and I'm going to rasp like this not big enough, then I need to make another line and cut it a little bit bigger. The main thing is you want to cut it so that the way you get it to fit on here is by filing the softer stuff until there's just a little bit of rim of board left here, and it'll fit down over the hole.
The bowl.
And remember also, your bowl may not be straight-sided,
That
it may have a
angle
little bit of
has to fit
angle, so
there.
you want it to fit to that too, if
So
possible.
you're really gonna be
But
following
give
a
at least a
little bit
little bit of
this way.
remaining thickness here for strength,
A
where it's
little
gonna
bit
fit
that
down.
way, so when you get done,
And that is it, that's the making of the
round.
collecting.
You can reshape it to some degree just by that basket to make it fit. So that's kind of long-winded story. I have no other way to really show it how to equal it. You just don't see that. You don't see any good instructions on how to do it or anything. But it's really more challenging than it looks, especially if you can't start with cording at the bottom and then make your net. The fishermen in old times, that's how they did it. So they knew exactly how high to make it, and they were making it intact all the way around. We're trying to make it by using some already made net that fixes at the bottom, comes around and meets itself, it's tied there, and it's still big enough and stretchy enough to get the top in. And then when we pull on it, it pulls those net eyes up and snugs the gourd right down against the bottom part, and then you've got the top drawstring holding it, and now you've got your equilibrium. If you think about it, I don't know if this would work, I've never tried it in a canoe, but if you've got a heavy thing here and a tight-fitting thing here that fits just right, and it falls in the water, what does it do? It falls in and it sits this way. So we got a big air bubble here and a floating wooden thing here. It's really going to be buoyant unless you don't get it pretty quick and it manages to get a whole bunch of water in the top and get enough water in there to put it down. But if you made it just right, it would stay pretty buoyant, quick enough for you, especially as a good swimmer, you get that thing and you wouldn't lose it. So that's what the equilibrium is all about. Does anybody have any particular questions about that? Is the tool making the hardest thing of all? That gourd was relatively soft. A lot of Hawaiian gourds are really hard on the outside. They're just beautiful, but it's real thin. It's real thin. So you have to go around, and as soon as you get through the hard, you want to keep sawing there because it's fun. Now you're going through the soft stuff. You want to just keep working your way around and watching that line just perfect and keeping the blade right on that line. Never try to cut through in one stroke. You'll always mess up. You've got to go all the way around, trying to get just a little bit of a cut through that hard outer shell. And then you come around again, and you come around again. You want to just cut it off, but just be real patient. Just keep going around until you finally get through it, and then you'll have the perfect cut. And hopefully you haven't pushed hard enough anywhere to crack it. A good Hawaiian, even when it's mature, it would be very unlikely, even if it's only 3/60 of an inch thick, that you would crack it if you just go slow like that. You're probably going to have a good intact gourd. So that's equilibrium. Now how about any of the tool working? Anything else that I mentioned? Questions?
Just a quick question. What do you think they used to cut that back in the day?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question.
Repeat the question, please.
It's in.
Repeat the question, please. For my
I'm sorry, the question. What did they cut the ipu with in the old days? Kehau has done it. A friend of mine named Ski Kwiatkowski on the Big Island in a cave one time, a shelter cave on a little shelf. He found a tool that was, rotting away over time. But it had a wooden handle and something sticking out of the wooden handle. And he knew what it was. And what it was the jaw of the photo. The mock fish, the predatory fish is kind of like a barracuda. The long snout. Has all these teeth. They're not real sharp. They got a little bit of rounding on the top. But for most of the jaw, it's straight.
What fish was this? Sorry.
The wahoo. Wahoo in English, Olo in Hawaiian. So that, and I've done it. So you have to get a pretty big Olo to get the good jaw where you've got a good length of teeth. But you can cut the ipu off back because she was done. She was done. So other than that, it would be real tough. You'd just be going all the way around with a little piece of obsidian or of a salt knife. or some way trying to get through that thing to get off. But that's the only thing I've seen amongst all the huge number of things that might have been chosen by the Hawaiian. So that was a gift that he told me because he found that. I think, what do they use that for? Why would they put an auto jaw in a handle? Equal person, I'm thinking about. Equals not too hard. There'll always be a few little gaps in the auto jaw. They're always shedding their teeth, so there'll be 1 or 2 gaps in the straight part of the teeth. I think it's the upper jaw that has the best teeth, if I remember rightly. But it really needs a pretty big one. If you knew some fishermen who go down by the docks, keep talking to them and say, you're going to get a real nice big auto. I want the head. And then you get that jaw. So you've got a tool with that. And if you think of anything else that we've ever found, if you had the shark's tooth knife and you went around and around and around with a shark's tooth knife, a real pointy one, like a white tip or something, a small little pointy one, and you just kept scratching it and scratching it, it would wear down the shark's tooth pretty quick. Hawaiian people would wear it down. But all you've got to do is get through that outer part. Well, if you get through that with something, you'll definitely be able to get the rest of it off of there. So it's a real trick, but all the old ipuhekis were made with 2 boards put together, all the old hekis, any kind of small cup, anything, the ipus for everything in old Hawaii. So all of them had to be cut.
Question. Have you ever heard of beginning the cutting before the gourd is completely cured?
I have never heard of that, but I sure would like to. Have I ever heard of doing the cutting before the gourd was completely cured? No, but I'd like to. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay.
I was just thinking that, that's the tough part.
It's
There's
really,
a way to get
really
it
tricky
started.
because the gourd,
Green, when it's in green. Yeah. I think it'll rot sometimes. If you cut the gourd when it's still green to put later, a lot of times it'll rot.
exactly, that's exactly right. So the ipu is going through this whole process of growing. It'll grow very rapidly. For the first couple of months, once the cake sets, in the first couple of months, if it has a bunch of water, it will grow really rapidly. If it doesn't get quite enough water, the gourd has 3 compartments inside, and so it'll make its shell, but it will be kind of 3-sided, because there'll be 3 segments of seeds inside. So it will be kind of more like this in cross-section, a little more this way in cross-section, right? It's when they really fill out, they've had plenty of water the first couple months, then they'll get nice and round, beautiful, smooth. There won't be a regular on the side, they'll just be all plump and filled out. Then they need to sit, not have a whole lot of water, really get full sun, and then they'll get a really hard shell, and they'll gradually mature. So if you want an ipu that's completely mature, you wait until the stem between the vine and the ipu is dead brown. Not a little bit brown, but dead brown all the way around. Scrape it with your thumbnail. Doesn't look green underneath. It looks brown. What the gourd is doing is opening itself off from the mother vine. The vine doesn't need to feed it anymore. It's top. It's ready to mature. It'll just close itself off. It'll stay on there a long, long, long time. It won't just fall off. It'll stay a long time. But then the ipu knows to put its sap and everything in all the other ipus that are trying to mature. But now you've got a fully mature ipu. So then you're going to have a really good gourd. Now you still set it aside if you really want the best. Then you can oak it at that time. If you oak it at that time, the stem should be dead brown all the way through. It could not possibly get more mature. Set it over someplace where you can watch it. And one day you'll see a little oily spot starting to form right around where the stem gets to the ipu. Funny little oily spot will be creeping down the side of one side or the other of the stem. That's it. That's where the gourd is trying to shed all its water. That's where it'll show the first sign of it. Right then, scrape it off. You could use a sharpened pearl shell. You could use a blade turned sideways like a carpenter's blade. Something, to scrape it. Just hold the blade sideways and scrape vigorously all over the entire gourd. If it's a good hard gourd, it's not going to hurt the shell. Get every last bit of that green skin off and put it in a cool, dry place. It will dry. It'll be beautiful golden yellow. It'll be perfect. And most every old white gourd I've ever seen looks like that. It'll look a deep upper, almost like this chair because of age. the tannic acid with time, it just gradually ages, it gets darker and darker, but at first it'll be a beautiful golden level. It won't have any spots, it won't have any irregular lines, any of the things that it gets from yeast and funguses in the field if it's just left out there. If you scrape it right then, it will be absolutely completely mature, and it'll have a beautiful, beautiful yellow, perfect skin. That's when you're going to have the very best ipu. If you make an ipuheke or ubeki or anything else out of the ipu, then it's going to be the best, hardest, most fully mature, fully filled out that you could possibly get. So if you just buy one from the fields, when they harvest, they harvest. So some of them are not fully mature. The seeds won't be fully matured inside. The shell is not fully hard. It might kind of implode if you work on it, as Clay can certainly tell you. You'll maybe start scraping it or something, it'll dry out real quick, it'll just start to implode, just collapse. Or like you say, if you do something to the ipu when it's just growing, damage it too much, it may just die and rot. So I don't think you could cut it like that ahead of time and get a jump on it, because anything you would do would be manipulating the gourd so much, plus it's hanging on the vine or sitting on the ground. You want it perfectly hanging on the vine so it's perfectly symmetrical. Put it on the ground, you can prop it up so it'll grow symmetrical, put it on some flat pad so it's perfect. But there's an awful lot that grow in real good gourds. And when they're grown in the fields commercially, they just grow. They just grow on the ground, they don't have a flat place. Maybe the little snails chewed on it a little bit here and there, might have a slightly rotty place where it was on some real wet soil. And then it might have places where the bugs, or especially the fruit flies, bit it when it was a cakey. So lots of flaws. And then it'll dry in the field and have all kinds of blotches all over it from the fungus and mold and everything, because it just dried out like that. So far cry from really carefully taking care of them. But in the old days, ipus were like children. You took care of them every day. You went out and watched them every day. Turned them if you needed to. If anything was scraping them, you got to get that to stop, or it's about to get something that make it stop. So I'm kind of getting off topic as usual. But let's see now.
Are there different varieties?
Many, many varieties. The wines have more varieties than anybody else, probably. Birth to death was ipus. No pottery, nothing else. Ipus, ipus, ipus. They have vast numbers of ipus, all every kind of shape and size, from little teeny wee ones like this big to huge big ipunuis this big. They have little squatty ones, really long ones, narrow ones like this, ones that came up like this in the neck, like you make them out of the neck, and on and on and on. All kinds of varieties. So I bred a lot of them back. I had a lot of them. I haven't bred any for all these years. I don't have any place on the mainland, so I've got a lot of beautiful seeds that are old. Maybe, like Claudia and I were talking about, maybe there's some horticulturist today that knows how to stimulate those seeds and make them grow. And I have given them out all over Hawaii in the past. There's lots of people that know how to tell Hawaii gourd, and a lot of them have Hawaii gourd seeds because I gave them out all over the island, especially the Big Island. Lots and lots. So I grew them on Oahu and I grew them on the Big Island, dried it in. So it really, the bow needles you don't have to hit near as much as with a water needle. I mean, I watched the Tufukatan Tau, that was Suapi Paolo, I think, that I watched for a long time. And some big guy, Samoan guy, came in to get an arm tattoo. That's Samoan, that's not Hawaii. Lots and lots of it was done here because the Peace Corps guys in Samoa wanted some, so they put that armband on it because it's pretty easy to do. And it just became real popular, and like, this is some Hawaiian, but it really came from the Peace Corps in Samoa. So anyway, this man was going to have an arm tattoo, and his arm was big as my thigh. Big as my thigh. So I watched him. He sat the man down, he's sitting up, and he took his comb like this, and he just went, made the line where he wanted to be, top and bottom like that. And he had the guy lie down, and he'd pick up one comb or another, and he'd do all the strikes for a certain part, and all the strikes for another part, because he knew exactly what the design was. So he didn't just do what modern tattooists would, like he was making a little hollow with a little hollies along the side or something like that. He did make each one he just made all the strikes for whatever the design was going to be with that particular code, and then all the other strikes what the design was going to be with that particular code. And he finished the whole thing about this high around this huge arm in 33 minutes. Unbelievable. That was absolutely stunning. And I saw another girl that got something like in her thigh here, and I saw her the next morning just walking around perfectly fine. You know, I said, how's it going? She said, no problems for me. Just a little bit red, that's all. Because there were so few hits, you know, when he make a little rectangle to be a house, a symbol for a house, he was just taking the 3-cone and just going pop, pop, pop. So there's 9 tiny little pupas, right? By the next day, it's already, the bone needles are carrying so much ink in because of the little scratches and pores in it and stuff, that just that little bit there, this blends together. And that little bit in my triangles, you know, if I had used the Kukui soot, every one of my triangles would be looking great from a really relatively small number of strikes. So I learned a lot with that. And that's a really good question. But you just, you know, watch and practice, and gradually you just kind of get the feel for it and start figuring out what works and what doesn't. But mine was because I wanted the experiments. I wanted to see if those other known dyes could work. And then if I had done it all with Kukui soot, like I said, people who use that powdered black stuff, it comes out of smokestacks and stuff. Personally, I would not want to be tempted with that. But in the one I've talked about where the father made the little holly to do the tattooing, and then they had the little chimney-like thing, and there had some constant tapping on the stone. What is that about? To build a soot up to an inch thick. What I think was when it was burning the Kui stuff, some rubbish was coming up with the soot, and this constant tapping every time the pure carbon would come up to get on the stone. This constant tapping was letting all the little particles fall off. So when they got done, they had nothing but pure soot. Is that cool? Just because they wrote about that one little tiny aspect of it, constant tapping on the stone where the soot was. Why? It was knock off all the little rubbish. So, what else? Anything at all? Now's your last chance. I'm not tired, so you can just sit here. We can be here until midnight. It's fine with me, all night, fine with me. But if you have any questions, now's your chance. No. Oh, question.
No,
It's a question. She can.
I
She can
have
interrupt.
a question.
You have a legitimate question.
I have a statement.
No, that doesn't.
We weren't able to do the braiding today, so if any of you are interested, I did bring my demo.
Oh, to stay around and watch it should show you the.
Yeah, and if you want to, because I have handouts and I have these sample strings that I made, and they're all made, and I really don't want to take them back home. So I can stay back there if you want to learn how to do this. It's a 4-strand square braid is what we were going to practice today. But if you know the techniques and then you know what my notes mean, you can follow any. You can make a square 6-strand. You can make a 5 flat. You can make an 8 square. So it's up to you. If you don't want to come.
Yes.
She was going to do the whole section of recording when I talked about all of that.
When are we going to do this?
So this is a fairly legitimate reason for interrupting. No problem.
Okay, sorry.
And we also, you know, they don't leave till Friday. And I know he's teaching at Kaʻimiloa on Monday and Tuesday. But Wednesday, unless I have another thought about it, but Puno's protocols are kind of screwy right now, so you can't get on to talk there. Yeah. So there's a possibility that we could get together again.
Oh, yeah.
You know, another
We can if you
evening
like.
or whatever to do the cordage or that's open if you guys want.
We have Wednesday and Thursday. Because Monday and Tuesday is all taken up to AMA.
Yeah.
Not the evening though. And then we daytime, then if we don't go to foothold, we have Wednesday and Thursday or whatever.
But thank you guys.